Second question. We know that
Senator Kennedy.
Sorry, Martin. Mr. Director, welcome. I bet you just love talking about where to put the FBI building, don't you? Probably one of your favorite topics. I've got two questions. Number one, if you took the major Mexican drug cartels, which also traffic people into the United States, and turned them upside down and shook them, President Lopez Obrador would fall out of their pockets, wouldn't he?
Well, I don't know that I can comment on a specific individual's corruption other than through cases that we bring, but I understand the point that you're making, for sure.
We're not getting much cooperation out of Mexico, are we?
Let me put it this way. While we have had some successes here and there in terms of extraditions and so forth, and I appreciate those, and I'm grateful to our Mexican partners for those, especially at the working level, we need a whole lot more from Mexico than we've gotten in terms of shutting down the cartels and stopping the flow of the precursors. I mean, I could go on and on. So I'm grateful for the successes we have had, but we need a heck of a lot more, is the way I would answer that.
Why don't we use leverage of what I call NAFTA 2 to try to encourage the president of Mexico to cooperate more?
Yeah, I mean, NAFTA, of course, is a trade agreement, and I'm not really an expert on trade relations. Certainly, from an FBI perspective, we welcome every tool in the toolbox to try to improve the relationship and the cooperation, and I'm hopeful that the Mexican government will see the value of building on the successes we have had and take it to the level that it needs to be, because it's not where it needs to be.
Okay. Here's my second question. We know that Jeffrey Epstein, who is now deceased, and Ms. Maxwell, his associate, who's in prison, were engaged in a conspiracy of sex trafficking with minors. So were others. It's been widely reported. What's the FBI doing to investigate the other people that were involved in these sex trafficking rings?
Well, I'm not sure that I can confirm any specific individual.
Well, let me put it this way. Let me give you some facts, widely reported. Jeffrey Epstein had video surveillance in all of his homes and on his private island. And there have been articles after articles from witnesses who have said he videotaped sex acts with prominent people because he was trying to incur, with young girls that he had procured, to try to incur favor with those prominent people and potentially to be able to blackmail them. Now, that's a fact. And the FBI and other federal agencies have raided his houses. Do you have those tapes?
Again, I can't discuss the specifics of our law enforcement operations related to Mr. Epstein or Ms. Maxwell, but obviously we had very active investigation related to both of them. But whether it extends to other people, I'm not sure that's something that I can comment on.
A suit was filed yesterday against one of those prominent people by one of the young women sex trafficked, allegedly, said he was part of the ring. It's on the front page, I don't know, is this the New York Times, Wall Street Journal? And we keep seeing article after article after article, and we keep hearing about prominent person after prominent person after prominent person. I just want to know if these prominent people are above the law and are going to be and aren't being investigated, or is the FBI investigating them?
Well, no one is above the law, number one. As to whether specific people are being investigated, that's not something that I, as I'm sure you can appreciate, can engage on here. We've devoted significant resources to the investigation.
Is it ongoing?
I'm not sure there's anything I can share with you on that, but let me see if we can get back to you and provide a little more information.
Well, for example, these allegations in this lawsuit, the civil action.
Yeah, I haven't seen
You ought to read
the article.
It'll trigger your gag reflex. Is the FBI going to investigate that?
Well, again, I haven't seen the article, but I would be happy to take a look at it and take it back and see if it's part of something
I'd
we're
just
already
like to
working
know.
on. I share your.
Yeah, is the FBI still investigating this, or are these prominent people going to go scot-free?
I'm not sure that I can tell you whether or not there is ongoing work being devoted to this. I would be happy to take a look at the specific article. I share your disgust at Mr. Epstein's conduct and Ms. Maxwell's conduct.
And others.
The whole operation.
Okay. Thanks, Madam Chair. Sorry, Martin. You're a fine American anyway.
Thank you, Senator Kennedy. Senator Peters, Senator Heinrich has kindly consented to give you time to prepare for your round of questioning, and he's going next because I made a deal with him.
Okay.
I'm going now.
We've done some musical chairs here. I apologize. Director, I wanted to ask you a little bit about the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, and specifically how the engaged in the business language may have broadened your ability to perform background checks, and what impact that then has on other agencies' ability to successfully prosecute things like the straw purchasing and gun trafficking provisions in that law.
So certainly BISCA was an important piece of legislation that has added to our authorities at NICS in particular in a number of ways in terms of additional background checks for the so-called U21 group in particular. And I think that's important because as I go around talking to state and local law enforcement, and I've been and talked to law enforcement in all 50 states, I believe, easily in this job. One of the two recurring themes you'll hear on violent crime is the role of juveniles and the role of mental health. Mm-hmm. Almost every group, no matter what state I'm talking to. And so the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act does, I think, take an important step in the right direction in terms of addressing that specific part of the threat. The part that you're asking about is more in ATF's lane, but we work very closely with ATF on our Safe Streets and Violent Crimes task forces, and we're always looking for the strongest violation to disrupt the threat. And so whether it's straw purchaser cases or things like that, I know when I was a line prosecutor, I tried a number of straw purchaser cases. Those are important tools. And so often that's one of the best violations to kind of dismantle a violent crime threat.
One of the other things that we haven't, I don't think, adequately addressed in the law yet, but which is skyrocketing, is these ghost guns or privately made firearms. Law enforcement has seen 1,000% increase in recoveries between 2016 and 2021. In 2022, we had a ghost gun was used to shoot and kill a 16-year-old at West Mesa High School in Albuquerque. And I wish that were a completely isolated case. What is the FBI doing to recover and prevent assembly of ghost guns? And what tools, maybe even more importantly, do you need from the Congress to be able to get your hands around this challenge?
So I would say ghost guns, as you say, represent a real challenge for law enforcement because the kits are cheap and widely available and undercut the ability to trace the firearm and in effect end up undermining the background investigation process. And unfortunately, we are seeing ghost guns more and more in violent crime and gang investigations. Now, as to authorities, you're really talking more ATF in terms of regulation or even legislation, but we do coordinate closely. Whenever we seize ghost guns as part of a takedown, we're obviously working closely with ATF on that. As to other things that Congress can do to help, at the risk of answering every question with the same answer, we need Congress to restore the progress that was made in 23 so that we can sustain our efforts against violent crime and sustain our work in terms of denials of firearms to the people who are legally prohibited from having them.
Yeah, absolutely. On that note, and I suspect it will be a similar answer, we made some progress recently with the Fend Off Fentanyl Act that was really designed to prevent fentanyl from getting inside the United States in the first place, but you have to deal with it once it's already here. You mentioned funding and the potential impact that the budget could have on your ability to disrupt that flow. Feel free to reiterate the importance of that and then also touch on other tools that you may need that to address the sort of crisis that we are seeing in communities all across this country.
So we are finding most of the fentanyl that we seize at the FBI is fentanyl that's already here in the United States, and what we're finding is that something like 70% of it is coming up in violent gang takedowns. So that shows you kind of firsthand the nexus between the fentanyl problem and the violent crime problem and some of the most dangerous offenders. And it is not unusual for the FBI, for any given field office, to seize enough fentanyl in one takedown to have wiped out an entire state. God. And so if you start thinking about the impact of the cuts that we've been talking about in this hearing, that's fewer seizures. That's more pills on the market. That's more people dying. I mean, just put it as bluntly as that. And that's just looking at it that way. And, of course, we also have all these investigations into cartel leadership. And, again, the cuts impact that if we're going to be serious about going after the cartels. Among the other things that we're doing to try to tackle the fentanyl problem, we have an initiative called J-Code that aggressively targets darknet trafficking of fentanyl. We just last year had an operation called Spector that was the largest ever, I think, takedown of darknet trafficking marketplace of fentanyl and other dangerous, synthetic opioids. So that's an important part of our work. I know in your home state of Albuquerque, I just remember off the top of my head, was a great takedown that they did where they were seizing enough fentanyl to wipe out like an entire state, along with, again, back to the nexus with violence, along with hand grenades, ballistic vests, the whole 9 yards. So the fentanyl problem and the violent crime problem are inextricably linked, and of course the fentanyl problem is directly tied to the problems from the other side of the border.
So not a great time to cut his budget.
Certainly is not. It's unfortunate we have another year of the Fiscal Responsibility Act. Senator Peters, thank you for your patience.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Reed.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Moran. Director, thank you for your service, and please convey my deepest thanks to the men and women who serve with you. You indicated in your opening remarks that last year you took a hit in your budget. This year, if you don't get what the President asked for, how many personnel do you estimate you'll have to lay off?
Well, we don't know yet how many, because of course we don't know what will happen. I think at the moment the effect of the 24 budget is that's about 1,000 positions that we can't fill, and we are kind of muddling our way through the impact of the 24 budget. But if Congress were to, in my view, make the mistake of doubling down on that, then the consequences would be very significant. I mentioned the work we're doing to protect people from terrorism. That's fewer tips and leads followed, fewer terrorist attacks detected. That's a significant concern in a heightened terrorist threat environment. I mentioned violent crime, arresting 50 bad guys per day, every day. The kind of cuts that you're alluding to means more violent gangs terrorizing neighborhoods, more bad guys on the street to hurt people. I talked about the threat from China. The scale of the China threat is massive. Cyber alone, they outnumber the FBI 50 to 1. So scaling backwards, means that many more cyber attacks at a time when they're trying to target our critical infrastructure, among other things. So it makes the environment safer for hackers. I talked about the border. We've got between 300 and 400 investigations into the cartels. We're seizing enough fentanyl in FBI field offices and our task forces, single seizures, enough fentanyl to wipe out an entire state. So cuts to our budget in 25 is going to mean more fentanyl on the street, more overdoses, more deaths, more violence. So when people ask me, what is the effect of these cuts, the people it hurts are state and local law enforcement and the people work together working with them trying to protect. The people it helps are the terrorists, the cartels, the violent gangs, the Chinese government, the hackers, the child predators. I can go on and on. So I would implore Congress, and again, this subcommittee I think has always been very responsive, but I would implore Congress, please don't make the mistake of thinking that you can make cuts like this and not have real consequences to public safety and to our state and local partners. I think that's the part that keeps getting lost. Our state and local partners, and I can say this with the perspective of having been in law enforcement since the mid-90s, state and local law enforcement these days depends on the FBI more than ever, not just for all the things I just listed off, but for training, technical assistance, fingerprints, DNA. I mean, you could just go right on down the list. NCIC, Senator Manchin, if he were here, would I'm sure be glad that I was bringing up NCIC. When an officer does a traffic stop, they're running the person's identifiers through the FBI databases back in West Virginia. That information tells them whether the person they pulled over is dangerous. So it just goes straight to officer safety. That's just another example. All this stuff is put at risk when we start talking about cuts of the sort that we had in 24, and we just cannot have happen in 25.
One of the ways we think around here, and I might be exaggerating the think part, is domestic defense. Domestic side, defense side. You're actually a national security agency, but you're lumped in with the domestic side. And we can't, I think, continue to think that way. Your operation is just as valuable to our national defense as the Department of Defense, and I happen to chair the Armed Services Committee, so I think that point should be made. I don't have much time left, but could you quickly characterize the domestic terrorist threat, particularly in the context of the election?
The domestic terrorist threat?
Yes.
So we view the domestic terrorist threat as being persistent, I should say, and significant. And the biggest concern is lone actors or maybe small groups acting against soft targets with easily accessible weapons, often with very little notice. And it covers the waterfront. We've seen a lot of racially motivated violent extremism. We've seen anti-government, anti-authority violent extremism that covers a variety of perspectives. And it is a threat that year after year continues to be a real concern.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Reid, I think our number in this CJS appropriation is $890 billion that's defense spending. So you can't make a clear distinction, as sometimes people try to do.
Well, I'm all for that.
I'm just trying
defense.
to point out that you're right.
Thank you.
Yeah, I may not have made that clear because you seem to want to argue with me. Director, you're talking about salaries and reduced financial support for the FBI in our FY24 budget. It was really effectively held flat, which it is a challenge in inflationary times. You request $85.4 million for the restoration of 270 positions related to national security and law enforcement. Is this your highest priority?
The restoration of positions is our highest priority, yes.
And if that was accomplished, if we were capable of doing that, that would the benefit of that is just what you described to Senator Reid, correct?
Right. The goal would be to allow us to sustain the pace that was set with the 23 budget. because what's happened is the net effect of the 24 budget is to set us back $500 million because of the factors that you listed. So the key is to restore our operations so that we can continue to hum against all the things that I was listing off to Senator Reid and not set us backwards. And if that doesn't happen, then we start falling even further behind is the problem.
Do you have a significant number of vacant positions already?
We have some positions that are vacant. Our fill rate is actually higher than historically it has been at the FBI, which is a good thing. It's good news for America. So we're trying to kind of manage our way through the 24 cuts through a combination of attrition and how fast we're filling the vacant positions we do have. But if it lasts, if what happened with 24 is replicated, then we're going to be in a real world of hurt.
Is the FBI workforce, what's the age category? Is it aging, or it's are the people nearing retirement that work at the FBI, or?
Well, we're coming off of the heels of you might call it a bit of a retirement bulge when you just look actuarially. So in other words, if you went back 20 plus years, there was a big hiring spree, if you will, post 9/11, and 1811's armed law enforcement agents in particular, in other words, the way the system works, if they have 20 years in service and they're 50 years or older, they're eligible to retire. So whenever you're looking at retirement age of the workforce, you got to go back 20 plus years and see what was happening then. And so we're coming off of a bit of a bookend of that group. So it's starting to level off is the last time I looked at it. So we're not in a big retirement bulge right now anymore. So that's part of why it's an issue.
Director, I mentioned in my opening statement the southern border and the challenges that we've had at the border. I mentioned a member of ISIS. I mentioned a NBC News report about an individual that was on the terrorist watch list that was released. I recognize that the primary responsibility implicates the failures of the Department of Homeland Security, but the FBI Terrorist Screening Center is the primary federal entity responsible for national security screening and for facilitating the sharing of information across government. Do these cases reflect a breakdown in our efforts to ensure that all government partners have full, actionable information they need to protect our citizens from terrorism?
So I'm not sure I can discuss specific examples, but let me try to get at your question this way. So certainly we have seen over the last 5 to 6 years an increase in the number of known or suspected terrorists, in other words, watch-listed subjects attempting to cross the border. And that is of concern, and that's where there's a lash-up between the TSC and CBP at the border that I think in general works pretty well. The bigger problem, in my view, is twofold. One, individuals who, when they come in, are either armed with fake documents or snuck in some way, or, and this is very important, individuals for whom there's not enough derogatory information in the intelligence community to watch list them yet. So let me just unpack that a little bit because this is an important point because it kind of goes to what Senator Collins was asking me about, and it may relate a little bit to your other hat on the Senate Intelligence Committee. So as we collect collectively across the intelligence community and with our partners less information about foreign terrorists overseas, there's less information to be had about who the people coming into this country are, which then means...
Would you say that sentence again? I missed the first part of the sentence.
So the way I look at it is, as we have less collection overseas against foreign terrorism, there's less sources of information to inform people about people coming in. So in other words, somebody could be coming in who should be watch listed, but isn't. And it's not because of a breakdown between CBP and the TSC. It's because the information that should have told everybody that this person is a threat has not yet been unearthed by whatever intelligence agency it is out there, because it's not just the FBI that puts people on the watch list. We're getting in for a threat. And so some of the cases that I have seen that concern me are situations where somebody comes into the United States. It's not because there was a breakdown between CBP and the TSC. It's because they weren't watch listed at the time. But in hindsight, they should have been watch listed because information was later developed that says, uh-oh, this person is a problem. You see what I'm saying there, right? That's a much bigger concern. In my view. And so we really need to be focusing on how we can try to address that with the rest of the intelligence community, with our partners, and so forth. When that happens, when we find somebody who's here in the United States who we now then know this person needs to be put on the watch list, then we use our joint terrorism task forces to go out and try to find the person, work with our state and local partners. We have the backstop of 800,000 sworn law enforcement, et cetera. But that to me is a bigger concern than the number of KSTs.
Director, just a brief follow-up. Is there a delay in timing once someone is known? It's known that they should be on the watch list. Is there a delay before it's known across government agencies?
I don't know about delay. I mean, there's an interagency process.
How long does it take?
I think it varies is the short answer. I mean, it's not just the FBI can snap its fingers and put somebody on the list. There's an interagency, very rigorous process to protect civil liberties and other things to put somebody on the watch list. But once they're on the watch list, there's pretty much instantaneous notification to the relevant parties. Yeah.